already started investing in that technology, and the minimal amounts of money, somebody asked, why are we putting more money into technology development? Because we need it to fill the gaps. We have a technological roadmap that was certified by the National Research Council. This is not an overnight thing. We didn't just think of this. I have to correct members of the committee who have said several times it seems like we just thought this up. We have been working on this. NASA has been working on this for decades. The president focused us like a laser when he stood up at the Kennedy Space Center, and people don't relate it, and I'm not trying to relate it to John Kennedy, but there were people who thought the president had lost his mind when he stood in Rice University campus and said, within this decade, we're sending humans to the moon and bring them safely back. Gene Kranz, who is a role model of mine and a flight director, he is Mr. Failure is not an option. He said he went home, he said he thought the president had lost his mind. He woke up the next morning and he said, no, that's not the case. The president trusts us, and he thinks we can do this. To have the president of the United States go to Florida and say, NASA's going to send somebody to an asteroid in 2025 and to Mars in 2030, I couldn't be more proud.
Yeah.
You know.
And my time's, thank you, General. Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Ms. Bonamici for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General Bolden, for returning and for your service to our nation. In a previous hearing in this committee, I pointed out some of the work that NASA does that affects Oregon's 1st District in several important ways, from education opportunities through the Space Grant Program to whale monitoring activities through NASA's National Ocean Partnership. And I wanted to ask you about the weather and climate monitoring. The marine economy in Oregon is very important to the coastal areas, and they rely on the data provided by NOAA and NASA. And in this NASA budget, I see that the Joint Polar Satellite System 2 climate sensors are being transferred from NOAA to NASA, but there doesn't appear to be an accompanying increase in NASA's Earth Science budget. So I wanted to ask you if you could please elaborate on how NASA is going to carry out this new responsibility. What are the criteria for having NASA assume responsibility, because we want to ensure that there are long-term measurements and observations that are sustained.
Congresswoman, I'll take it for the record to get the exact amount, but I think we did get a modicum of funding that came with the climate sensors, but I'll take that for the record. But I will say, just as we did with the Discover mission and others, we actually came to the House Appropriations Committee and said, look, we would like to take this on because we think this is very important. In the case of Discover, we have instruments that have already been built. They are already installed on the satellite. It makes no sense to us to take them off and put mass simulators on. And Chairman Wolf said, look, I don't want to do that, but give it your best shot. You know, send me a proposal and tell me what you're going to do. And we demonstrated to him how doing it a different way, we could bring it in at a much less cost than it had originally been proposed. And that's what we have become accustomed to doing. Somebody mentioned earlier the fact that many of our missions have come in on budget or under budget and on schedule recently, and it was attributed to an increase in budget. That's not the case. I attribute it to the incredible people I have who are working for NASA, who now have had a change of culture, if you will. They understand that we're not going to get any more money. And so they're looking for innovative ways to do things. We knew we couldn't get enough money for a classic asteroid mission. You know, that would be great if we could put humans in a big rocket and send them to an asteroid between Mars and Jupiter. Our budget is not going to allow that. Never, ever. I doubt it, unless we really do something big and you all decide to be generous. So we had to innovate, and we came up with the concept that is now the hallmark of an asteroid retrieval mission. So that's the way we do things.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask you about, I had a great conversation with members of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. They were in town to talk about research funding, which is, of course, very important. We talked about the biological and physical science research that's done at the space station. As you know, there's a lot of research in space that affects medical care here. And I wondered, because of the potential for key medical advancements, is it surprising that what seems like a relatively small amount of the funding for ISS goes to research functions? So will you elaborate on that a bit?
I think we have priced it about right, the amount of money that we put in our human research program, and I think what you're looking at is HRP that's dedicated to astronaut health and safety. What is not seen in that number is the amount of money that goes into human research. For example, the National Institutes of Health has a grant program in the millions of dollars, and the grantees do work on the International Space Station. One stipulation: can't have anything to do with astronauts. It's got to be it has to impact life here on Earth. Now, if it happens to help astronauts, great. But we don't count that kind of money that's being spent. CASIS, which is now the non-governmental organization that is responsible for going out and recruiting, selecting, and then overseeing science experiments flown in the American segment of the International Space Station. Our utilization of space station is up. The number of experiments that astronauts are able to do now that construction is over is up. It's a dynamic laboratory, better than anything anybody's ever seen before.
That's terrific. I see if I can get one more question, and I understand that there's some work being done to develop a prototype exploration suit for use on board the ISS, and I wondered, is that a repurposing of the current, I guess it's the EMU that's used, or is it going to be replaced, and will there be a competitive process for that?
My understanding is it will replace the EMU. It is a suit that's made to operate in a near gravity, in a less than 1G environment of Mars. Looks like Buzz Lightyear, the one I've seen. It's much less cumbersome. Much less hard on the shoulder joints, for example, where we actually have had injuries with astronauts in the current EMU. So it's a new development.
And is it a competitive process for that?
It was chosen. It will be chosen through a competitive process. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I now recognize Mr. Posey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, General, for joining us again. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, of all the agency heads that I've had the privilege to sit in, you've been the one that's been the most forthcoming and straight talking, and I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't want to get redundant. I just want to get these things in a proper perspective, just kind of for my memory bank here. The Keck study suggested that an asteroid mission would cost $2.6 billion. And I understand NASA disagrees with that number. And I was just wondering how much NASA thinks it will cost to retrieve and return an asteroid or remove it, whatever the goal ends up being.
Congressman Posey, I'll correct you and say we don't disagree with the Keck number.
Oh.
However, our mission, as we envision it, is different from what the Keck number on which it was based. Keck, very respected group of scientists who studied this, they did not have an SLS or an MPCV. They did not have a head start on solar electric propulsion. They assumed that we were going to use a big rocket and go between Mars and Jupiter into the asteroid belt to put humans with an asteroid. And so I think that's where the $2.6 billion came from. I have been cautioned by many, and so I will take their advice and not try to give you a number right now. We are going into mission formulation this summer. After we talk with our international partners, with academia, with amateurs, to be quite honest, to find out what this mission should have in it, and then we'll come back with a more definitive number on what we think it's going to cost. But my guess would be for a similar mission that Keck had, it'll be something less than their estimate.
Well, that's something, because certainly when you talk to people about appropriations, they want to know what's at the end of the line, and if it costs as much to go to an asteroid or twice as much as going to the moon. I mean, that makes sense, and you can understand that. How would you compare the cost of the administration's LASSO mission with the return to the moon?
If I can use the example of the Keck study, and I'm not adopting that, but it is an example. An example is Keck says $2.6 billion to carry out their type of asteroid mission, which we think is more expensive than ours. The number quoted to me for Altair, for the lander, for a human lunar exhibition or landing, $8 to $10 billion. So going back to the moon, if we use the numbers quoted for Altair, which came from NASA, in the Constellation program, and we accept the numbers from Keck, then going to the moon is almost a factor of 3 more expensive. And our budget won't sustain that, won't accommodate that.
Yeah, and I heard that number when Congressman Stewart and you were having dialogue. What's that number based on?
The Keck number or the Altair number?
The return to the moon number.
Return to the moon. It is the number that I have been. I wasn't around, so I can't tell you. But I was quoted $8 to $10 billion for the lunar lander that was planned for the Constellation program. And one of the reasons that it never materialized was because NASA at the time did not have the funding.
Yeah. Can you get us a copy of that, just that documentation,
we can
just
do
so
that.
We'll have it,
Yes,
because I hadn't
we'll
seen
do
it
it.
before. Could the hardware, obviously that's being developed, such as the SLS, be used for both missions? I mean, wouldn't we use the same rocket to go to the asteroid that we would to the moon? And
you would use if we are going anywhere in deep space, and I will stipulate that we can call the moon deep space, but we don't consider the moon deep space anymore. But you could use SLS to go to the moon. You will use SLS to go to an asteroid, to Mars, and the like.
Okay. The next thing, of course, I was going to ask if there's anything salvageable from the $9 billion Constellation mission to nowhere.
We are using Orion quite effectively. We have gotten its cost down, its weight down, and it's on schedule to fly in 2014.
Okay. Because I think that might offset some costs if we've got some stuff in the ground.
And to be fair, we flew Ares 1X. Which was a part of the Constellation program. That was the last thing we did in the Constellation program. Ares 1X was the most heavily instrumented rocket to ever go in space. And the data that we collected from Ares 1X is now available to every rocket manufacturer in the country, plus any rocket manufacturer that is cleared to receive ITAR-related data, I think.
Yeah. When Kennedy set the goal of going to the moon within a decade, he literally inspired a nation. You might have known a skeptic, but as a teenager, it inspired me and my entire generation. When we heard the idea of going to an asteroid and maybe doing 2 spacewalks on an asteroid, all I heard was crickets.
Yeah.
So what do you think the
What's
difference?
the difference?
Yeah.
We were not at war. I was not marching in the streets of Columbia, South Carolina, as we were when President Kennedy announced we were going to the moon. We were in the midst of the civil rights era. There was hatred being spewed all over the streets of the United States. We were at war in another country, and we were racing the Russians, the Soviets back then. We are not racing the Soviets. We have hopefully we will not have an enemy like we had then. Hopefully we will not go back into the streets in racial discord again, although I can't guarantee that sometimes. And definitely, this nation will be very cautious before it enters into another war like Vietnam or some others that people could cite. Significant difference in time and conditions.
Thank you. I see my time's expired. Thank you.